3 more trays, and she could vanish into the kitchens, and no one at the mating ball would remember the maid who had carried the wine. That was the whole of Nell's plan. Be furniture, be smoke, be the plain gray dress, the lowered eyes, the steady hands, and let the great wolves of Duskmere choose among themselves while she counted down the minutes until the longest night of her life was finally over. Keep your head down and your feet moving, Hessa had told her that morning, folding the gray wool into her arms. The old housekeeper was the only soul in Hollowcrest who knew what Nell truly was, and she had said it the way you'd tell a child to mind a cliff edge. Tonight of all nights, girl, you are no one. Serve, disappear, live. So Nell kept to the wall, tray balanced against her hip, and did not look at the dais. Above her, the great hall blazed. 1,000 candles, silver banners bearing the running wolf of House Caro. And beneath them the daughters of every high pack in the territory, gowned in river blue and storm gray, each one turned toward the throne like a flower toward the sun. 7 years, the Alpha King had refused to choose a mate. Tonight, by the law of the pack, he no longer could. An unmated king was a crack in the wall through which enemies poured. So the houses had sent their finest, and the air was thick with perfume and ambition and want. Near the front stood the one they all expected him to name, Viela of House Ash, the Chancellor's daughter, silver-gowned and certain, smiling as though the crown were already warm in her hands. Nell smelled none of it the way the others did. She never did any more. Against her breastbone, beneath the coarse wool, lay a token of hollow iron, no larger than a thumbnail, its face carved with a rune older than any house in this room. Her mother had pressed it into her palm the night the fires came 15 years ago, with fingers already going cold. Wear it always. Let it keep you quiet. Let them forget you were ever born. The charm flattened her scent to nothing, and dampened the wolf that should have run beneath her skin until it lay silent as a stone. To every nose in Duskmere, Nell smelled of dust and tallow, and no one at all. That was how a dead girl walked among the living. That was how the last daughter of a slaughtered pack served wine in the hall of the king whose bloodline had destroyed her family. 3 more trays. A horn sounded, low and long, and the hall fell still. The Alpha King rose. Nell had served in this palace 2 years, and never once let herself look at him. She looked now. She could not help it. Everyone did, and behind the iron at her chest, something gave a single, traitorous throb. Saverin of Duskmere was younger than his legend, and harder than his years. Dark hair, a jaw like a blade, a soldier's stillness in a room built for dancing. A pale scar ran from cheek to collar. He wore no crown. He did not need one. When his gaze moved across the assembled daughters, 3 of them swayed toward him without knowing they had moved. He did not descend to them. He descended past them. A murmur ran the length of the hall as the king stepped down from the dais and did not stop at the first row of gowns, nor the second, but walked, slow, scenting, nostrils flaring at something no other wolf in the room could catch, straight across the open floor, toward the wall. Toward the servants, toward her. Run, Nell thought, and could not. Her feet had turned to river stone. The token at her breastbone was warm, now warm, when it had lain cold for 15 years, heating against her skin like a coal, waking in ash. And beneath it, deep and long buried, her wolf lifted its head for the first time in her life, and strained toward the man crossing the floor. No, please, not me. I am no one. I am smoke. Severin stopped in front of her. For 15 years, she had kept the wolf so still. She had almost forgotten it was there. A thing folded small behind the iron, a coal banked under ash. She had taught herself not to grieve it. And now, at the worst possible moment, in the worst possible room, it woke. It rose in her like a tide, straining against the charm, straining toward him, and the effort of holding it down brought the sting of tears she could not afford and the memory of smoke she would never stop carrying. The tray trembled. She fixed her eyes on the second button of his collar and willed herself smaller, flatter, gone. He stood close enough that she felt the heat off him, close enough that the entire hall had turned to watch their king ask a serving girl for wine. He did not ask for wine. "What is your name?" he said, very quietly, as though the question were meant for her alone. "Nell, my king." Her voice came out even. 15 years of hiding had made it even. Only Nell. His eyes searched her face, gray eyes, wolf-bright, and in them a bewilderment that mirrored her own, as though he too stood at the edge of something he did not understand and could not step back from. "No," he said softly. "You're not." Then Alpha King of Duskmere turned to face 600 of the highest-born wolves in the territory, lifted one hand toward the maid in the gray dress, and spoke the words that had not been said in that hall for 7 years, the words that made a queen. "This one. I choose this one." The tray hit the floor. Silver rang on stone. And in the ringing silence that followed, Nell understood, with a cold that ran deeper than any charm, that the single thing she had spent her whole life avoiding had just happened in front of the entire world. She had been seen. For the space of 3 heartbeats, no one in the great hall moved. Then the wall of silence broke, and the whispering poured through the crack like floodwater. "A servant." He named a servant. "Is she even a wolf? I can't catch a thing off her." That last voice belonged to Vela of House Ash, and it carried the way a blade carries. The Chancellor's daughter had gone the color of her silver gown. All night she had stood at the front of the choosing, with her chin lifted, waiting for a king to walk to her, and he had walked past her to a girl who carried the wine. Humiliation and fury warred across her lovely face, and fury won. Nell's eyes were already moving. The old reflex, the only one that had ever kept her alive. Counting doors, counting guards, measuring the distance to the servants' passage behind the tapestry. Every exit was a wall of watching faces. There was nowhere in the world to put a girl who had just been chosen by a king. Across the hall she found Hessa in the crush of servants, gray with terror, mouthing a single word at her over and over. "Run, run." As if there were anywhere left to run to. My king, Thyela's father, was already moving, cutting through the crowd with the smooth authority of a man who had run this court for 20 years. Lord Corrine Ash, Chancellor of Duskmere, stopped between Severin and the servants' wall and bowed just low enough. "Forgive me, the night is long, and the choosing is a heavy rite. Perhaps you have mistaken exhaustion for the call of the wolf. This girl is no one. She has no house, no line, no name beyond the one the kitchens gave her." "I know what my wolf called," Severin said. He had not looked away from Nell once. "Den your wolf has erred," the Chancellor said, and a hiss went through the nobles at the boldness of it. "Sire, hear me plainly. As your father's man and yours, a king cannot take a mate from nowhere. The pack will not kneel to a queen with no blood behind her. The border packs are watching this hall tonight for any sign that Duskmere has grown weak or foolish, and if word travels that you set aside 6 high daughters for a scullery maid on a whim." He spread his hands. "You hand your enemies a war." The words landed exactly as they were meant to. Nell saw them land, saw the faces around her harden from shock into agreement, saw even a few of the king's own guard shift uneasily. They did not want her. Of course they did not. She had never in her life wanted less. "Say you were mistaken," she begged him silently. "Please, let me go back to being smoke." But Severin's jaw had set like iron. "Then we settle their doubts," he said. "The right provides for it. If a chosen mate's blood is questioned, the truth is drawn at dawn, scented before witnesses, and if scent will not answer, then by the blood right of the old law." He finally turned to the Chancellor, and his voice dropped to something cold. You want proof. She is worthy of me, Corin, then you shall have proof. At first light, she will stand the right, and every wolf in this hall will smell exactly what she is. A ripple of grim satisfaction moved through House Ash. Viola smiled again, small and vicious. Well, girl? The Chancellor turned on her at last, and every face in the hall turned with him. Have you nothing to say for yourself? No house to name? No line to claim? It was a trap, and she knew it. A name spoken aloud would end her as surely as the right, so she did the only thing left to her. She lowered her eyes, and said nothing, and let them believe it was shame. Shame she could survive, and Nell's blood turned to ice in her veins. The scenting, she might survive. The charm held her scent flat, and no nose living could pierce it. But the blood right of the old law was another thing entirely. The blood right did not ask the nose. It reached past scent and skin, past any charm ever carved, and pulled the truth of a wolf's line up out of the marrow for all to witness. It would peel away 15 years of hiding in a single breath. It would speak, before the whole assembled court, the name her mother had died to bury. Vain. And the punishment for a vein still breathing had been written into Duskmare law the same night her family burned. Any survivor of that pack, root or branch, was to be put to death on sight. Severin had just, to save her, ordered the one thing certain to kill her. As the court broke into knots of hungry gossip, Viola drifted close on her way past, close enough that only Nell could hear. Whatever you are, she breathed, sweet as poisoned wine. The dawn will have it out of you, and whatever it is, it will not be enough. She smiled and swept away before Nell could draw breath to answer. At dawn, then, the Chancellor said, well pleased, and bowed. The court will witness. Nell stared at the king who had chosen her, this stranger who had ruined her with a single kind, catastrophic word, and understood that she had until sunrise to become smoke again or die. They gave her a room with a lock she could not open from the inside. It was not a cell. It was worse, in its way. A guest chamber in the royal wing, warm and wide and hung with tapestries, a fire already lit, a gown laid out across a bed larger than the whole of the servants' loft, where she had slept for 2 years. A queen's room, or near enough. 2 guards stood outside the door, for her protection, they had said. Nell knew a cage when she was shut inside one, however soft the walls. She went straight to the window. 4 floors down, torchlight and stone. No ledge, no ivy, no mercy. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass and made herself breathe. Think, you have hours. You have thought your way out of worse. Except she had not, and she knew it. There was no charm she could carve before dawn that would fool the blood right. There was no lie old enough. There was only the truth, waiting in her marrow for the sun to come and drag it into the light. The lock turned. She spun, her back to the window, and the Alpha King stepped into the room alone. He had shed the ceremony. No banners now, no watching court, only a man in a dark shirt with a soldier's tired eyes. That, more than anything, undid her practiced stillness. A man who wanted to harm a woman did not send the witnesses away. You're afraid of me, he said. It was not a question. I can see it, if I can't smell it. You've been afraid since the moment I said your name. He stayed by the door, keeping the whole width of the room between them, as though he understood exactly how little space she had left in the world, and did not want to take any more of it. I won't touch you. I want you to know that first. Whatever the court believes it saw tonight, I am not a man who takes what isn't offered. Nell said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence gave away less than any answer. Severin studied her, and the bewilderment from the hall was still there in his face. Turned over now and examined. In 7 years, he said slowly, my wolf has not stirred for a single one of them. Not the beauties, not the heiresses, not the ones sent to my rooms uninvited. I had made my peace with an empty crown. He shook his head, once as though it angered him not to understand himself. And then a girl I have passed in a corridor 100 times, carries a tray across a hall, and everything in me stands up and says, her, mine. As if it had always known, as if it were only waiting. The iron token burned cold and hot at once against Nell's skin, and low in her chest the wolf she had silenced her whole life pulled toward him so hard it hurt, a deep, tearing ache under the ribs, the charm and the bond fighting over her like two hands wringing a cloth. She pressed her palm flat to her breastbone to still it, and turned the motion into something like a curtsy. He was not what she had built him into across all those years of serving in the shadow of a throne she hated. She had needed him to be a monster, the son of the king who gave the order, the heir of the house that turned her pack to ash. It was easier to hide from a monster. But the man across the room only looked tired and honest and as lost as she was, and that was far more dangerous than cruelty. Cruelty she had armor for. This she did not. You should let me go, my king, she said quietly. Send me away tonight. Say your wolf was wrong. As the chancellor said, it would cost you nothing and save you a great deal. Is that what you want? Something flickered behind his eyes, not anger, closer to hurt, quickly hidden. To be sent away? The honest answer and the safe answer were, for the first time in her life, the same word, and still she could not make herself say it, because the wolf in her chest was screaming no, and because this stranger had looked at a nameless maid and seen someone worth a war, and no one had looked at her and wanted her to stay since the night the fires took everyone who ever had. What I want, she said carefully, does not matter by morning. Severin frowned. He crossed half the room before he caught himself and stopped. The right frightens you that much? Yes. Why? And there it was. Quiet, patient, terrible. He tilted his head, and she watched his nostrils flare on instinct, reaching for a scent that wasn't there, reaching and finding the strange flat nothing that had kept her alive, and now she saw it dawn on him, made no sense at all for a living wolf to be. His frown deepened. Why do you have no scent? Behind him, faint through the thick door, a bell began to toll, the quarter hour. Only a few hours of darkness left, and the King of Duskmere was already, gently, beginning to ask the one question that would end her. She did not answer him. She had learned young that a question left hanging long enough would eventually tire and lie down, and so she let the silence stretch until Severin, watching her, seemed to understand that no answer was coming, and, remarkably, let it go. Rest, he said at last, his hand on the door. Whatever the morning brings, you'll meet it better for having slept. He paused. For what it's worth, I did not mean to put you before the right. I meant to shut Corin's mouth. I have a habit of reaching for the nearest weapon and discovering too late that it cuts the wrong way. A grim line touched his mouth. I'll draw its teeth before dawn. You have my word, his word. As if a king's word could unmake the old law. But when dawn came, gray and cold, and the court crowded into the right hall, the right master, waiting with his shallow bowl, Chancellor Ashe, standing ready, like a man at a hanging he had paid for, Severin did exactly that. There will be no blood right, he said, before the master could lift the blade. Uproar, he raised his voice over it, and the old iron of the battlefield came into it, and the hall went quiet. The law is not only Corin's, to quote. A chosen mate cannot be put to the right while the bond between king and mate is still forming. That is the binding moon, and it is older than House Ashe's grievances. I claim it. For one turn of the moon, this woman is under my protection, and my roof, as my chosen. When the moon comes full again, if the bond is sealed between us, the choosing stands and needs no right. The bond is proof enough of a worthy mate, as it has been for 1,000 years. If it has not sealed, his jaw tightened, then your right may proceed, and I will not stand between it and her. The Chancellor's face was a study in swallowed rage. He had built a perfect trap, and watched the king step out of it sideways, using a law even older than the one Ash had wielded. "As my king wishes," he said through his teeth. "One moon, and when it fails to seal, for how should it, with a girl who cannot even name her mother, the court will remember that you were warned." Vaila's stare over her father's shoulder promised that a month was a long time in which a great many things could go wrong. They were both right, and only Nell knew how right, because the bond would not seal. It could not. The charm at her breastbone that kept her scent flat and her wolf silent was the same wall the bond kept breaking itself against, night after night. She had felt it all through the dark hours, the two of them straining and neither winning. To let the bond seal, she would have to take the charm off. And to take the charm off was to stand naked before a hall full of noses as the last living vein. The king had not saved her. He had only moved the killing a month down the road and made himself believe it was mercy. So the binding moon began. She learned its customs from Hessa, who dressed her now in gray silk instead of gray wool, and wept a little doing it. Chief among them was the one that undid Nell entirely. During the trial moon, a chosen pair did not touch. Not a hand, not a sleeve. The bond, the old wisdom held, had to form of its own free will, unforced, so the two walked and spoke and shared their evenings always a careful hand's breadth apart, and let want do its slow work across that small unbridgeable gap. For Nell it was the cruelest kindness imaginable. Every evening Severin came to the long room above the gardens, and they sat with the tables width between them, and talked. She had braced for a king's arrogance. She found instead a man who asked her questions, and listened to the answers. He spoke of the border wars he had fought before the crown fell on him, of soldiers he had failed to bring home, of a father he had loved and feared in equal measure and never once pleased. He did not ask again about her scent. When she deflected, he let her. When she offered some small true thing that she liked, the garden's best in rain, that she had taught herself letters from a stolen book, he received it like treasure, and she watched him file it carefully away, and hated how much she wanted to give him more. "You watch the door," he observed one evening, "every night, as though you're waiting to bolt through it. Old habit. You may, you know," he said quietly, "bolt. I told you I'd not keep you against your will. The binding moon binds me, not you. If you wish to be gone before it ends, tell me, and I'll see you safely over the border with gold enough to start again where no one has heard of any of this." He meant it. That was the terrible thing. He was offering her the one thing she had wanted her whole life, a way out, clean and kind, and she sat there in his mercy and could not take it, because the wolf in her chest had chosen him even more surely than his had chosen her, and because she was so tired of running that the thought of one more border nearly broke her. "You should want me gone," she said. "I'm nothing but risk to you." "Perhaps I'm tired of the safe choice," Severin said, and smiled. The first real smile she had seen from him, and it changed his whole hard face. "It has never once made me happy." One evening, the talk ran late and easy, and she forgot herself. She reached across the small table to point at a line in the book they had been arguing over, and he reached at the same moment, for the same line, and their hands came within a breath of meeting over the page. They both went still. Neither moved. The gap between their fingers could not have been the width of a coin, and across it, Nell felt the bond lunge in her chest, like a hound hitting the end of its chain, felt the charm haul it back, felt the ache of it flare white behind her eyes. Severin drew his hand away, first, slowly, his jaw tight, obeying a custom that was plainly costing him as much as it cost her. 9 days, he said, under his breath, as though reminding himself. That night alone, undressing by the low fire, Nell coughed, a small, dry thing at first, and then a deeper one that bent her double and would not stop. When it finally eased and she straightened, gasping, There was blood on the handkerchief pressed to her mouth. Right, and more than a little. She stared at it a long moment in the firelight. The charm had always cost her something. She had grown up, knowing the price of silence was slow, but it had never asked for blood before. It was asking now, because for the first time in 15 years, something inside her was fighting to answer a call, and the harder the bond pulled at her, the harder the charm strangled it, and her along with it. She had thought she had a month. She was no longer certain she had that. The court had decided what she was, and having decided, set about proving it. They could not touch the king's chosen openly. The binding moon protected her, so they did it in the old bloodless ways. Nobles fell silent when she entered a room, and began again, pointedly, once she passed. Her chair at the high table was set a hand lower than the rest. A steward forgot to announce her. And beneath it all ran the whisper the chancellor had planted and tended like a garden, that the king had been ensorcelled, that no true wolf could love a thing with no scent, that Duskmare was being quietly stolen by a nameless creature who smelled of nothing because she was nothing. That last whisper frightened Nell more than all the rest because it was true. "They test you to see if you'll break," said a low voice at her shoulder one morning. She turned to find a broad, plain-faced man with a warrior's scarred knuckles and steady eyes, Bram, the king's second, who had shadowed Severine since their border days. He did not smile, but he did not sneer either, which set him apart from the whole of the court. "You don't break, I've watched. Severine sees it too. It's half of why he can't look away from you." He studied her a moment longer, frankly. "The other half I can't account for. I've known that man 20 years, and never seen his wolf so much as lift its head. Now it won't lie down. Whatever you are, Nell of Nowhere, you're no serving girl." "I carried your wine for 2 years, my lord," she said evenly. "You never once noticed me." "No," Bram agreed, unbothered. "That's rather my point." And he inclined his head and left her with the distinct sense of a friend she could not yet afford. The near misses came thicker as the moon thinned. A hound in the yard caught the wrongness of her and would not stop howling until she fled indoors. A visiting alpha from the eastern packs bent to kiss her hand in greeting, breathed in and drew back frowning, and she spent the rest of the feast, certain he would say aloud what his nose had told him. And always, always, there was Severine's own wolf across the small nightly gap, reaching, thwarted, reaching again, and every time the charm slapped it down, Nell paid in a fresh fit of coughing, she smothered in her sleeve when no one could see. Her reflection had gone gray at the edges, Hessa noticed. Hessa said nothing, and dosed her tea with something bitter, and prayed. Viola chose her moments in public, and chose them well. At the harvest feast, she rose, sweet-faced, to toast our king's mysterious bride, and wondered aloud, to a table of laughing nobles, whether the queen might favor them with a shift. "For surely," she said, "we would all so love to meet her wolf." The hall turned, a chosen queen who would not show her wolf. Nell smiled and pled a woman's indisposition, and felt the net draw one loop tighter, because of course she could not shift. The charm had seen to that 15 years ago, and she no longer knew whether she had a wolf left to show. Then, 9 days before the full moon, Chancellor Ashe made his move. He came to the garden room at the dinner hour, uninvited, with a stooped old man in the deep red robes of a right master at his heel. Severine rose at once, and Nell felt the temperature of the room drop. "A courtesy visit," Ashe said smoothly, "and a small precaution. Master Orin has served 3 kings at the sealing rites. He has come only to confirm that the bond is forming as it ought, that when the moon turns, we find no unpleasant surprises." He smiled at Nell. "You'll not object, surely, to being looked at, unless there is something to find." The old right master shuffled close, and Nell made herself a stone. He did not touch her. He only breathed her in, long and slow, his clouded eyes half closing, and she felt the charm hold, felt it flatten her to that familiar nothing, and let herself believe, for one heartbeat, that she was safe. Then Master Oren's eyes opened, and they were troubled. "There is no scent," he said slowly, "and there is no bond forming beneath it. There is only," his brow furrowed, "a wall. A made thing. A silence that does not happen in nature." He turned his cloudy gaze on the Chancellor, and then, terribly, on the king. "Sire, this woman wears a charm of concealment, and a powerful one. Worn long, the bond cannot seal while it is on her. Nothing can pass that wall, not the right, not the truth, not your wolf." He spread his gnarled hands. "If you would have your bond, and your proof, she must take it off. Whatever she is hiding beneath it, she must stand before us without it." The silence in the room was total. Nell did not dare look at the king. She waited for the question, "What are you hiding?" for the demand, the dawning disgust. It did not come. When at last she risked a glance, Severin was not looking at her at all. He was looking at Ash. With the flat, terrible calm she imagined his enemies saw last. "You've had your look, Master Oren. My thanks." To the Chancellor, softer, which was worse, "You are very eager, Corin, to see my mate stripped bare before your court. I will remember how eager." But he did not deny the charm, and he did not defend it, and Nell understood that she had just handed this good man a doubt he could not unknow, and that his silence now was the sound of trust beginning, very quietly, to crack. Ash's smile spread wide and slow. "A man watching a snare pull tight at last. A charm," he repeated, savoring it. "How curious. What honest woman hides her very self behind old magic?" He turned to Severine, all false regret. 9 days, sire. On the 9th night she removes the charm before the court, or she stands the right. And either way," he inclined his head at Nell, "we will finally learn her name." Nell's hand had risen, without her willing it, to press flat against the small hard shape at her breastbone, the only thing that had ever kept her alive, and the very thing they now meant to strip away. She could not sleep, so she walked. It was the one freedom the long night still allowed her, the palace after midnight, its corridors emptied of watching eyes, the only hours she could move through Hollowcrest without arranging her face. She had thought foolishly that she might find a way out down some forgotten passage. Instead, she found the truth. She heard the Chancellor's voice first, low and unhurried, leaking through the half-open door of the old muniment room where the Pack's records were kept. She should have walked on. She pressed herself to the cold wall beside the door and listened, because her whole life had taught her that the words spoken about you in the dark are the only ones worth trusting. The moment she takes the charm off, the right master will read her line, and that is the end of it. Ash, calm as a man discussing the weather, a concealment worn 15 years, begun when she was a child. Ask yourself what child needed to erase her own scent 15 years ago, and from whom? A second voice, younger, a man Nell didn't know, one of Ash's creatures. "You think she's—" "I think," Ash said, "that when the old king destroyed the Vane pack, he did it on the word of his chancellor, who told him the Vane were massing to betray the crown. And I think you and I both know the Vane were doing no such thing. They held the Ashfell mines, and I wanted the mines, and a lie, whispered to a grieving, frightened king, is a cheap price for a mountain of silver." A pause. Nell had stopped breathing. "I am not troubled that a Vane whelp survived. I am troubled that she has surfaced in the king's own bed, where at any moment she might learn to talk. A living Vane is a witness to what I built this house upon. She cannot be exposed. She must be ended, cleanly, lawfully, at the right, with the whole court as witness that justice was merely done." The floor seemed to tilt under Nell's feet. 15 years she had believed her family died in a war. They had died in a land grab. Her mother, her father, her small cousins, lost to cover a lie told for a silver mine, by the very man now smiling her toward her death. And the king? the younger voice asked. He's bound to her by that cursed old law, he'll not hand her over easy. There was a silence, and, when Ash spoke again, his voice had changed, gone flat, and final, and colder than anything Nell had yet heard from him. Then the king has grown as sentimental as his father and twice as inconvenient, he said. Severin was always a soldier and never a ruler. If he will not set the creature aside when her name is spoken, if he means to stand between House Ash and what is owed it, then the moon that fails to seal his precious bond can seal something else. Vela is young, Vela is loved. And a widowed pack, looking for a strong hand to hold it together, will not look too closely at how it came to need one. A rustle of papers. Say nothing, do nothing. 9 days. Let the law do our killing, and if the king objects, we will find that grief takes even kings. Footsteps. Nell was moving before she knew it, folding herself into the black mouth of a side passage as the door swung wide, and Ash passed within arm's reach, close enough that she could have touched the sleeve of the man who had murdered everyone she loved. He did not see her. Killers rarely look for ghosts. For one blind moment, she was 6 years old again, hidden in the root cellar beneath her mother's hands, listening to boots and chaos overhead, breathing in smoke and her mother's fear and the cold bite of iron pressed to her chest. Wear it always. Let them forget you were ever born. Her mother had not been hiding her from a war, she had been hiding her from this man. The charm was no curse, laid on her by cruel fate. It was the last thing her mother ever did to keep Corin Ash from finishing what he had begun. She stood in the dark long after his steps had faded, shaking her mind a white roar. She had come to this palace with one law written on her bones: trust no one, need no one, survive, and it had kept her alive for 15 years. It told her now exactly what to do. Ash would kill her at the right regardless. She had 9 days and a fast horse, and a border she knew how to cross. She could be gone by morning and let the wolves of Duskmere tear one another apart over a throne. Let the son of the king who burned her family reap the harvest his own chancellor had sown. It would even be a kind of justice, except that Severine had sent his guards from the room so as not to frighten her, except that he had offered her gold and a clean road and asked nothing back. Except that somewhere in this cold palace slept a tired, honest man who did not know that the person he trusted most had sold his father a war and was now measuring him for a grave. And she, Nell of Nowhere, the last Vane, the one soul in Hollowcrest who had overheard it, was the only living thing who could warn him. To do it, she would have to tell him what she was, and the moment she told him what she was, she handed him the power to end her himself. Dawn was coming. Somewhere down the corridor, the first bells began to ring. Nell pressed the cold iron charm to her lips like a woman praying and understood that whatever she chose before this moon was out, she was going to have to stop being smoke. She meant to tell him everything. She spent the whole of the next day building the courage, turning the words over until they were smooth. She would go to him that night. She would tell him about Ash in the muniment room, the silver mine, the coup dressed as grief. She would tell him what she was, a Vane, the last one, and set her life in his hands, because a man who sent his guards away so as not to frighten her was a man she could trust to hold it. And if the bond could only seal with the charm gone, then she would take the charm off for him, in private, whatever it cost her, because dying bonded to him seemed suddenly better than living as smoke. She came to his study after the household slept. He was standing at the dark window, and he turned when she entered, and she knew at once that something had already gone wrong. Nell, he did not come to her. I've been meaning to speak with you, as have I. Let me say it first. His voice was careful and gentler than she had ever heard it, and that was how she knew it would hurt. I've thought a great deal since the Rightmaster came. About the charm, about what a woman must have survived to have worn such a thing since she was a child. He looked at her, and there was no anger in his face, only a kind of grief. I will not ask you to take it off. Do you understand me? Not for the bond, not for the right, not to prove yourself to a court that does not deserve you. Whatever it hides, it is yours, and you have carried it a long time, and I will not be one more man in your life who demands you make yourself bare for his convenience. She stared at him. It was the kindest thing anyone had ever said to her, and it was undoing everything. So, I've made arrangements, he went on, before the moon turns. Bram will take you east, past the border, with coin and papers, and a name no one here can follow. You'll be free of the right, free of Ash, free of the smallest hesitation, all of it. You'll live. That is the only part of this I find I cannot compromise on. He stopped there, but she saw the rest of it move behind his eyes. Some other sentence. He had decided not to let himself finish. Pressed down hard the way a soldier presses on a wound. For a moment she thought he would cross the room. For a moment she thought he would say the thing that might have changed everything. Instead, his hand closed slowly at his side. And the moment passed, and the careful gentleness came down over him again like a visor. "You're sending me away." Her voice came out very flat. "I'm setting you free. There's a difference, though. I grant you it doesn't feel like one tonight." And there it was. Every word she had built her courage around turned to ash in her mouth. He did not want the bond. He had learned there was a wall inside her he could not pass, a self she would not show him, and rather than fight for it, rather than fight for her, he had decided the cleanest thing was to open the door and be done. She had spent one perfect fortnight, letting herself believe a king had looked at a nameless maid and chosen her, and now the choosing was being politely, gently, unmade, sent east with coin and papers, like a problem solved. Of course, she thought, with the old cold settling back over her like a familiar coat. Of course no one keeps you. That is the one lesson the world has never stopped teaching. She had built the whole day around trusting him. She had polished the words until they shone, and now she watched them turn impossible, because you did not hand your throat to a man in the same breath he was showing you the door. If she told him now, vain Ash, the mine, the coup, he would hear only a drowning woman clutching at any rope, and the last thing he would ever feel for her would be pity curdling into doubt. She could survive being sent away. She could not survive being doubted by him. She did not tell him about Ash. She could not. Not now. Not into this. To warn him now would look like a card played to stay, a frightened woman inventing a plot to keep from being sent away. He would hear it as manipulation, and she could not bear for him to hear anything from her as a lie. Not when this was the last clean thing between them. She would find another way to warn him. She would write it, leave it, do it from the road. Anything but stand here and beg. "Very well," she said. "Thank you, Your Majesty, for the coin and the papers." She dropped a curtsy, perfect and empty, the curtsy of a servant to a king. "You've been more than kind." Something flinched across his face at the title, at the flatness, at the curtsy, as though she had struck him. "Nell, I'm tired," she said. "Forgive me. It's been a long day, and there's packing to do." She left him standing at the window with whatever he had been about to say still unsaid, and she did not let herself cry until the door of her own room was shut behind her. Then she sat on the edge of the queen's bed she had never wanted and pressed the heels of her hands to her eyes, and wept, silently, the way she had learned to weep as a child, so that no one, anywhere could hear. She had a warning to deliver, and a border to run, and a heart, apparently, still foolish enough to break. She would find some other way to warn him, send word from the road, once she was too far off to be accused of inventing a plot merely to stay. He would learn the truth of Ash when she was safely gone. It was, she told herself, the cleaner way. It was, she knew, only the coward's way wearing clean clothes. But cowardice had kept her alive for 15 years, and tonight she was too heartsick to be brave. 3 days to the full moon. She began that night to pack. Ash did not wait for the moon. Perhaps he sensed the king slipping the noose again. Perhaps he simply decided that a girl who could be quietly gone by morning was better dead tonight. before any accident of law or love could save her. Nell never learned which. She learned only that on the eve of the full moon, at the gathering, the pack held to bless the turning. While the whole pack stood in the torlit yard, and the moon swelled fat and orange over the walls of Hollowcrest, someone, in the upper gallery, lifted a crossbow and aimed it at the king's chosen. She never saw it. She was watching the moon, thinking of the road, of the warning she still had not found the courage to give him. She did not see the glint in the gallery or hear the whisper of the bolt. Severin did. He moved the way he must have moved on 100 battlefields, before thought, before fear, a soldier's body spending itself on instinct. One instant he stood a careful pace from her, obeying the custom that forbade his touch. The next, he had crossed that forbidden distance and turned his own body into a wall between Nell and the gallery, and the bolt that had been meant for her heart buried itself in his shoulder. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. He grunted, staggered, put a hand to the shaft. Around them the yard was still catching up. Then the moon's bane on the bolt reached his blood, and the Alpha King of Duskmere cried out. It was a sound Nell would hear for the rest of her life. Not pain, or not only pain, but the sound of a wolf being wrenched from the man it had lived in. He went down hard, and where a shifter's body should have surged toward its other shape in a crisis, his simply could not. The poison had come between him and the beast that had lived in him since birth, and it was burning the bridge as it went. She caught his head before it struck the stone. All around them the gathering exploded. Screams, drawn blades, Bram roaring for the guard. The assassin already fleeing across the rooftops and gone. Severin. Severin, look at me. His eyes found hers, wide and white-rimmed and terribly aware. The gallery, he got out. Get behind. Get to cover. It may not be even now. Even now, with poison eating the wolf out of his marrow, he was trying to put her somewhere safe. I'm not going anywhere, she said, and meant it in a way that frightened her, and held his thrashing head still against her knees, while the healers came running. They carried him to his chambers. Nell went with them and did not leave. She had been 3 hours from the border. She did not think of it once. The healers worked through the night, and by dawn had drawn out what moonsbane they could, and it was enough to keep him breathing, and not enough to give him back what was lost. The eldest of them said it plainly, because Severin demanded it plainly. The poison had severed him from his wolf. He would live, he would walk, he would never shift again. The beast that made him alpha, that made him king, that had reached across a crowded hall to choose a scentless maid, it was silenced now, walled off behind a wound no healer could reach, as surely as Nell's own wolf had been walled off for 15 years behind a scrap of cold iron. They were, she thought, sitting at his bedside in the gray light, a matched pair at last, 2 wolves who could not be wolves. By the second day the news had outrun the healers. It reached the court as rumor and settled as fact. The Alpha King of Duskmere would never shift again. Nell heard it in the hush that fell over the servants when she passed, saw it in the way even loyal men could not quite meet her eyes. A wolf-severed king was by every unwritten law the pack lived by no king at all. Somewhere in the palace, Chancellor Ashe would already be counting votes and pouring wine and mourning, publicly and beautifully, the tragedy that had befallen his beloved sire. He had not gotten the girl. But he had gotten something better, a broken king, and a pack that would soon go looking for a whole one. All his patience had been rewarded, and it had cost him only a single bolt and a hired arm across a rooftop. Nell sat in the wreckage of it and understood that Severin had not merely been wounded. He had been, in the eyes of everyone who mattered, unmade, and he had chosen it, in a heartbeat, to keep her heart beating instead. He slept most of that first day. When he surfaced, near dusk, his eyes were fever-bright and unfocused, and they went straight to her, and the first thing the king said upon waking half-destroyed was not for himself. "You're not hurt." A rasp. His hand groped across the blanket toward her and stopped short of it, custom holding even now in his ruined body. "Tell me you're not hurt." "I'm not hurt." Her voice cracked straight down the middle. "You great fool." You crossed the whole floor. You broke the custom. She could not finish. Cheap price, he murmured, and something that was almost his old smile ghosted over his cracked lips. A wolf for a wife. I'd make it again. His eyes drifted shut. Don't run tonight, Nell. Just tonight, let me know where you are. I won't run, she said, and the promise cost her nothing, because the road east had stopped existing the instant the bolt found his shoulder. She dipped a cloth in cool water and laid it across his brow and stayed. Through the long fevered night she stayed, changing the cloth, holding the cup to his cracked lips when he could drink, murmuring the small nothings you say to the very ill, that he was safe, that she was there, that morning was coming. He surfaced and sank and surfaced again, and every time he came up his eyes searched the room until they found her, and every time they found her, he let go and slipped back under, as though her being there were the one medicine that worked. And as his fingers finally, helplessly, brushed the back of her hand, the first time they had ever touched, something passed between them through that single point of contact that had nothing to do with the bond she thought was walled away. A wash of feeling that was not hers, his terror still, but not for himself, for her, his grief, for the wolf he had lost, folded small and set aside as unimportant beside the fact that she was breathing. And beneath it all, steady as a second heartbeat, something vast and quiet and undefended that she had no name for and could not bear to look at directly. Then he was asleep, and it was gone, and Nell sat in the dark holding a hand she was no longer permitted to let go of, and understood with a lurch of pure terror that the wall inside her had just for one instant sprung a leak. A king at the door of death could not preside over any right, and so the moon turned, and the sealing did not happen, and the whole trembling machinery of the court simply stopped, the one mercy the moon's bane bought her. When Severin was well enough to travel, Bram loaded them into a plain carriage under cover of dark, and took them not east to the border but north, Hessa riding with them, unwilling to let the girl she had guarded for 2 years out of her sight, to a shuttered hunting lodge at Greywater half a day into the pine woods where no courtier ever came. He'll heal better away from them, Bram said, meaning away from Ash, meaning away from the whispering court that had already begun, quietly, to speak of the king in the past tense. A wolf-severed alpha was, to them, a dead man still walking, and you'll both breathe easier, where the only eyes are mine. At Greywater, the days went soft and slow. Nell had spent her life in the airless heart of the palace. Here there was only pine smell, and cold, clean water, and the enormous northern quiet, and a man learning, day by painful day, to live inside a body that no longer roared. She changed his dressings, she walked him up and down the frost-stiff garden when his legs shook. She read to him in the evenings from the lodge's mildewed books, and argued with him about them, and watched the gray leave the edges of him and the color come back. He hated being tended. She learned that fast, and learned to do it without letting it look like tending. When his hands shook too badly for the buttons of his shirt, she would come and stand close and talk of something else entirely while her fingers did the work, so that it became a conversation and not a charity. When he could not sleep for the phantom ache of the wolf that was no longer there, she sat up with him and told him about Ashfell as she half remembered it, the bell in the yard, the apple trees, the way her mother used to sing the pups to sleep, until the two of them had built a whole lost house between them in the dark. She had never spoken of Ashfell to a living soul. She found she could speak of it to him. And slowly, without either of them naming it, the thing they were doing stopped looking like a queen nursing a broken king and started looking like two people making a life out of the only materials the world had left them. And somewhere in those pinewood days, the thing between them stopped being a bond, straining against a wall, and became, simply, love, the ordinary daylight kind, built of small mercies and shared silences and the way he said her name. The custom that had kept them a hand's breadth apart had died with his wolf. There was no bond left to protect from forcing. The court would have said, nothing left to seal. so they touched now. He would take her hand while she read. She would rest her head against his good shoulder by the fire. And every time skin met skin, that leak in her wall widened. She felt flickers of him, warmth and wry humor, and a grief for his lost wolf. He never once spoke aloud, and she said nothing about it, because to explain it, she would have to explain everything. Then one evening, with the fire low and his hand warm around hers, she found she could not carry it alone another hour. "There's something you have to know," she said, "about Ash and about me. And I need you to let me say all of it before you speak." He went still, and he listened. She told him about the muniment room, the silver mine at Asheville, the war his father had been sold, the innocent Allied pack put to the torch on a chancellor's forged word. She told him about the coup, about Viola, about grief that takes even kings. And then, with the fire snapping and her heart in her throat and 15 years of silence breaking open all at once, she told him the last thing. The pack Ash destroyed was called Vane. He hunts a survivor because a living Vane is a witness to what he did. She made herself hold his eyes. "I am that survivor, Severin. My name is Azelle Vane. Your father burned my family on the word of the man who serves you. And my mother died hanging this charm around my neck, so his hounds would never smell what was left. That is what I hide. That is why I have no scent. I have been the last of a murdered pack, living in the house of the men who murdered it since I was 6 years old." The silence stretched so long, she thought she had lost him. Then Severin lifted her hand and pressed his mouth to her knuckles, and when he looked up, his eyes were wet and blazing at once. "Then we are both the wreckage of my father's reign," he said hoarsely, "and neither of us chose the blood we were born to. Azelle." He said the name like he was learning a psalm. "I will not pretend the crown I wear isn't stained with your family's blood. But I swear to you on the wolf I've already lost. I will spend whatever is left of me making it right." Ash will answer. "Your name will be spoken in that hall as what it was. Innocent. You have my word. And this time the old law can't unmake it." She believed him. That was the strange, dangerous thing. After a lifetime of trusting no one, she believed this ruined man completely, felt the truth of every word come through the place where their hands were joined. He had not flinched from her name. He had not weighed her against his throne and found her wanting. He had learned the very worst of what she was. The enemy blood, the buried pack, the thing his whole court would kill her for, and answered it by pressing his mouth to her hand and swearing to spend himself clearing it. No one had ever chosen her knowing everything. She had spent her life certain that to be fully known was to be finished. He was teaching her, one impossible evening at a time, that it might instead be where something began. She should have felt only joy. She almost did. But even as he said it, a cough clawed up her throat, and she turned her face away and caught it in her sleeve, and when she folded the cloth quickly out of sight, the firelight had already shown her the dark stains soaking through it, more than ever now, because the closer she let herself grow to him, the harder the buried bond fought the charm. And the harder it fought, the faster the charm was wringing the life out of her to keep her hidden. She had a promise from a king and a name returned to her at last. And folded in her sleeve, the growing proof that she might not live long enough to hear it cleared. 2 mornings later, a rider in Ash's colors reached even Greywater, a summons under the council's seal. At the next full moon, the pack would convene to judge whether a king who could no longer shift was fit to hold his crown, and to complete, at long last, the sealing rite so cruelly delayed. The trap had simply moved its appointment. And this time, Nell knew, it would not be moved again. She collapsed the morning they were to leave for the council. One moment she was fastening the clasp of her traveling cloak. The next, the room tilted, and the floor came up to meet her, and she was on her knees, coughing hard into her cupped hands. The sickness in her worse now, far worse, the charm at last collecting the whole of the debt it had let run for 15 years. There was no hiding it now. Each cough tore something looser, and the edges of the room were going soft and dark. The way she imagined the edges of a life went soft and dark at the very end. She heard Severin shout her name from very far away. She heard Hesse, who had insisted on coming north to tend her, drop to the boards beside her. "It's the working." The old housekeeper's voice was shaking. "I've watched it eat her for weeks, and said nothing, because she begged me to. It's killing her, Severin. The bond's been fighting it since the night you chose her, and the charm's been strangling them both to hold. And it can't hold any longer. She'll be dead by nightfall with it on. Then take it off." Severin was on the floor with them, Nell's head in his hands. "You know what comes off with it," Hesse said. "Her scent, her name. Every nose between here and the sea will know a vein still lives. Take it off, and you save her life and hand it straight to Ash." Through the roaring in her ears, Nell tried to say asterisk, leave it, better hidden than dead in the open. Asterisk, the only law she had ever lived by, but she had no breath left to shape it. She felt Severin's hands find the cord at her neck. She felt him hesitate, one heartbeat, over the choice between the woman and the war. For one moment, no one moved. Nell felt the whole shape of the trap close around them even as she choked. The charm was killing her, and its only cure was the one thing that would deliver her to her killers. Stay hidden and die in 3 hours, or be seen and die at the council in 3 days. She had spent 15 years choosing hidden. She tried, with the last error in her, to choose it once more, to shape the word leave better. A corpse no one can name than a vein in the open, and could not force it past the blood. Severin looked down at her, and she watched him do the sum she could not, and watched him refuse its answer. "I did not lose my wolf to lose her too," he said, and tore the charm away. For one endless instant, nothing. Then the world opened 15 years of walled silence came down all at once. And it did not hurt. It was the ending of a hurt so old she had stopped feeling it as pain, the way you only notice a sound when it stops. Her wolf surged up into her chest, and stood at last to its full height, alive, whole, hers. The tearing in her chest went still, and the bond that had spent a moon breaking itself against the iron found the walls simply gone, and it poured through her and into him and back, a flood with no dam left to stop it, and sealed with a soundless thunderclap that she felt in her teeth, in her marrow, in the deepest root of her. She could feel him, not a leak, not a flicker. Him, entire, pressed against the inside of her own heart, his terror melting into disbelieving joy. His love, no longer folded small and set aside, but standing open in the full light, so much of it, and so unguarded, that she gasped, and he could feel her. She watched it break across his face, everything she had never let anyone see, the child in the cellar, the 15 years of smoke, and under it blazing, her own long-hidden love for him given, now with nothing held back. "There you are," Severin breathed, staring at her, as though she had risen out of the sea. "There you are, Iselle. I can feel you. I can." His voice broke entirely. She sat up in his arms, her lungs clear for the first time in weeks. Her scent, her own true scent, pine and cold water and something bright beneath, filling the little room, and she laughed, wet and astonished, because she was alive and free and known and loved. All at once, all together, the 4 things she had been certain. For one shining hour at Greywater with the fire warm and his heart open against hers and her wolf breathing easy in her chest at last, Nell let herself believe it was over. That this was the end of the story. That she had run far enough and hidden long enough and could finally stop. Severin gathered her against him as though she might dissolve, and she felt his face in her hair and his shoulders shaking. And through the bond, she felt what it cost him and what it gave him both, the plain animal relief of a man who had been ready to lose her and had not. Hesse wept openly by the hearth, one hand pressed to her mouth, watching the girl she had hidden for 2 years breathe clean at last. Outside, a wind moved through the pines. And for a little while, none of them spoke of the council, or the law, or the loosed scent already drifting out beneath the door and into the world, because some hours are too bright to let the dark in. And this was one, and they had all earned it. She had forgotten that a scent set free travels on the wind. She had forgotten that the council was 3 days away. And she had forgotten, in the joy of it, the oldest lesson of her life, that the moment you let yourself be seen is the moment the world decides what to do about it. The reckoning came that same night, and it did not come from Ash. It came from Severin. Nell woke past midnight to find the bed beside her, cold, and the lodge's main room lit. He was up, dressed, standing over a table where he'd spread a map of the border passes and a purse of gold and the papers Bram had forged for her a lifetime ago. He did not turn when she came in, but she felt him know she was there. That was the bond now, always on, a warmth she would never again be without. And she felt, through it, exactly what he meant to do, before he said a word of it, and her stomach dropped. "No," she said. "Isel, say it then, so I can tell you no to your face." He turned. His jaw was set in the old iron, but his eyes were wretched. "The council is in 3 days. If you walk into that hall, every wolf in it will scent what you are before you've crossed the threshold, and the death law will have you inside the hour, bond or no bond. I cannot stop it. Look at me." He spread his arms, and the fury and the grief in the gesture took in the whole ruin of him. "I am a king who cannot shift. Half that council already means to take my crown. The other half will not lift a hand to save the vain girl who cost them their alpha's wolf. I have no wolf, no votes, and no army, but Bram. If I bring you into that room, I watch you die in it. So you will not come into that room." His voice dropped. "You'll take the North Pass tonight, with the gold and the papers. You're healed now. You're whole. You can run the way you've always run, only this time there's no one hunting you. Because I will go to that council alone, and I will tell them the bond never sealed, and that I sent the scentless girl away, and let them do to me whatever they came to do." He had it all worked out. Of course he did. He was a soldier, and this was how soldiers loved, by calculating the exchange that spent themselves and spared the rest. She could see the whole grim arithmetic laid out behind his eyes, as plainly as the map on the table, every line of it running to the same total. Her, alive, somewhere far away, never knowing what it had cost. And she hated it, and she understood it, and beneath the hating and the understanding, she felt her heart crack clean down the middle, because no one had ever loved her enough to want to lose her before. "You'd deny the bond." She could barely speak. "You'd deny, asterisk, me asterisk. Stand in front of the whole pack and lie that you never, to keep you breathing, gladly, in a heartbeat, every day for the rest of my life." He said it simply, as a fact, and that was the worst of it. "Don't you see what you are to me now? I lost my wolf and found I didn't much care, because I still had you. I am not going to trade your life for the pleasure of dying honestly beside you. You are worth more than my honor, Isel. You are worth more than the crown and the pack and the whole rotten house my father built. Let me spend what's left of me, putting you somewhere the world can't reach. Let that be the one thing I get right." And there it was, the same door he had opened in his study, a moon ago when she'd thought he was casting her off. She understood it now, all of it, turned inside out. He had never been sending her away, because he didn't want her. He had been trying, both times, to be the one thing no one in her life had ever been, a person who would rather lose her than let her be hurt. His coldness had been love the whole time, wearing armor. Every cold thing he had ever done rearranged itself in front of her, the night in his study, when she had wept into her pillow, certain he had cast her off. He had been trying to send her somewhere safe. The offers of gold, the clean roads east, the careful hand's breath he had kept between them, even as his wolf tore itself apart, reaching for her. All of it, every act she had read as distance, had been this same fierce, wrong-headed tenderness, this same refusal to let her be hurt on his account. He had been protecting her since the night he chose her. She had simply been too well trained in rejection to know love when it finally arrived with its armor set down. It was the noblest thing she had ever seen. And she would sooner have died than let him do it, because she knew something he did not. She had spent 1 hour that day, feeling the whole of him through the bond, and a lifetime before it learning exactly how the powerful lied, and she knew, with a certainty that burned, that a Severine who gave her up to save her would not survive it. He would walk into that hall and deny her, and let them break him, and the wolf severed, mate for sworn king, they left standing, would be a hollowed thing that lived a while, and then quietly stopped. She would be safe over the North Pass and alive, and she would feel him die by inches through a bond he'd sworn to carry alone. That was his idea of saving her. "You stubborn, self-slaughtering man," she said, and her voice shook with something that was not quite grief and not quite fury, but the fierce hot thing that lived under both. "You crossed a whole floor and gave up your wolf so I could live one more day. And now you'd give up your life and your name and your pack so I can live it somewhere you're not." She crossed the room and took his ruined face in both her hands, the way she had never once been allowed to. "You keep trying to buy me a life with the pieces of yourself. I don't want the pieces, Severin. I want the man. All of him in the same room as me, until we're old." "There is no version of that room where you live," he said hoarsely. "Then we'll build one." She had stopped running somewhere in the last hour, and only now felt her feet touch ground. "I have spent 15 years being smoked to stay alive, and I am done. I'm done hiding, and I am done being saved. We are going to that council, both of us, and we are not going to survive Ash by disappearing. We're going to survive him by telling the truth so loudly the whole pack has to hear it." They came to Hollowcrest at the full moon, in the last hour before the council, and they did not come quietly. Ram had ridden ahead, while Ash had spent the moon certain his prey was fled or dying. The king's second had gone down into the muniment room with the one key Ash had never thought to guard, the loyalty of the clerks who actually kept the records, and had drawn out the oldest ledgers of the Ashfell War. What he found there Nell had suspected, and Ash had grown too comfortable to fear. The original dispatches, in the Chancellor's own unmistakable hand, laying out the lie before the fire ever fell. The vain massing to betray the crown. The urgent need to strike first. And, folded between them, a private accounting, barrels of Ashfell silver, tallied to House Ash, dated the very season the vain pack fell. A man who murders a people for a mountain of silver cannot resist, in the end counting the silver. The great hall was packed, as it had been the night of the choosing, 600 wolves, the same silver banners, the same craning necks. Aish stood at the council table, in his chain of office, Vela at his shoulder, and when the doors opened and the king walked in on his own 2 feet, with the scentless maid beside him, the chancellor smiled, because he thought he had already won. A wolf-severed king, a girl about to be unmasked, all of it public, all of it lawful. "So she did not run," Ash said, pitching it for the room. "Sire, before this council, does you the kindness of a fair hearing. Let it first do its plainest duty. Let the girl be scented. Let us all learn at last what your wolf was so eager to." "Her name is Iselle Vane," Severin said. He said it into a silence that dropped over the hall like a blade, and he said it without fear, and Nell felt the whole room stop breathing. "Last daughter of the vain pack of Ashfell," he went on, his battlefield voice carrying to the rafters, "which my father destroyed 15 years ago on the word of his chancellor. That man there, in the chain of office, who told a grieving king the Vane were traitors, so that House Ash could take their silver mines. They were not traitors. They were murdered, and the proof is in his own hand. Bram stepped forward and laid the ledgers open on the council table. The hall erupted. Ash's voice cut over it. Sharp. Now. The smoothness gone. Forgeries. A dying king's cast-off and a soldier's fairy tale. The law is the law. A vein draws breath, a vein dies, and no theater changes it. Send her, and be done. Gladly, said Nell. She stepped into the open floor where once she had dropped a tray of wine, and she did the thing she had spent her entire life ensuring no one would ever make her do. She let them see her. Her scent rolled out across the hall. No longer nothing, no longer a wall, but pine and cold water and the unmistakable old blood of a pack these wolves have been raised on stories of. Gasps, recoiling. And then, before the deathlock could find its voice in any throat, she reached for the wolf that had been silent in her for 15 years, and for the first time in her life, in front of the entire pack, Izel's veins shifted. The wolf that stood in the center of the hall was pale as ash and unmistakable, the very image out of the oldest tapestries on these walls. The running wolf of Vane, thought extinct, alive and whole and looking the Chancellor dead in the eye. And the pack, who knew their own history in their bones, made a sound that was not fear. Into it, Severine spoke the last nail. The bond between us sealed 3 nights ago. Any wolf in this hall consented. My wolf chose her, chose the daughter of the pack my house wronged. And the old law is clear beyond argument. A sealed mate bond is proof of a worthy mate, and proof past any right. She is not on trial here. He turned, at last, the full weight of him on the man in the chain of office. He is for the murder of an allied pack, for the forging of a king's cause, and for the plot I can now name before you all. To poison me, to seat his daughter on my throne, and to call it grief. It was Bram who took Ash by the arm. It was the council's own guard, reading the ledgers over one another's shoulders, who did not stop him. Viola's face had gone the color of ash. Not the triumphs she'd worn the night a king walked past her, but the dawning horror of a woman watching the ground she'd been promised open beneath her feet. She looked at Izel. Izel, human again, held her gaze, and said nothing at all, and let the silence be the answer. They took Ash out, through a hall that had, an hour before, been ready to watch him kill her. No one raised a hand for him now. Later, when it was done, when the ledgers had been read aloud and the vain name spoken in that hall at last, as what it had always been, innocent, Severin found her by the tall windows, where the moon poured through. You could have run, he said quietly. I built you a clean road 3 times. You never took it. I was finished running. She turned to him. I spent 15 years, being no one so that I could stay alive. I would rather be someone, with you, and risk everything, than be safe and be smoke for the rest of my life. She took his hand, and through the bond she felt the truth of him answer hers, open and unguarded, and hers. You wanted to buy my life with the pieces of yourself, so I'm giving you mine instead. All of it, in the same room as you, until we're old. And there, with her palm against his, and the bond running bright and warm between them, she felt something she had not expected, a stirring deep in him, faint as the first ember in cold ash. His wolf, not gone after all. Silenced, wounded, walled away by the poison, the way hers had been walled by the charm, and answering now, weakly but truly, to the one thing that had freed her wolf too. Not magic, not a rite, only being at last, completely known and loved. Anyway, Severin felt it the same moment she did, and the look on his face was worth every year of smoke. They were married under the next full moon, in the same great hall, and this time, when Izel walked its length, no veil, no disguise, no charm. Every eye that had once slid past the maid with the wine now followed the vain queen, who had walked into a death sentence and turned it into a throne. Some of them, she knew, had laughed at her. Some had wanted her dead. She passed them all, with her chin high, and her wolf easy in her chest, and her hand in the hand of the man who had chosen her when she was no one at all, and she did not spare a single one of them a second glance. They had both been thrown away once, a scentless maid, a wolfless king, no one's first choice, either of them. But they had chosen each other, in the full light, with nothing hidden. And that, in the end, was the only right that ever mattered. Thanks for listening. I hope this one stayed with you. Do you think Iselle was right to walk into that hall and gamble everything on the truth, or was Severin right? That some people you save by letting them go? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And I'll see you soon for another story.